Fragile talks between the Trump administration and Iran continue, while the U.S. is stepping up after tragedy struck Venezuela. These are just two of the key stories we're following out of Washington this week. Now, for more on this, let's bring in our Washington correspondent, Reggie Cecchini. So, Reggie, peace talks on the Iran war took place in both Europe and Washington this week. Where do things stand right now on each side, and how are Americans feeling about this conflict that has been dragging on for nearly 4 months now?
Well, Miranda, it would appear that there may be a partial breakdown in the Memorandum of Understanding with reports through the overnight hours that Iran fired on a vessel in the Strait of Hormuz as the vessel was traveling near the coast of Oman. That would obviously be in violation of the MOU. And the question here is, will that lead to a further breakdown? Especially given the fact that we've had the Secretary of State in the Middle East trying to sell this memorandum and broader agreement to Gulf allies who fear that this could potentially give Iran better footing, not only on the global stage, but also with a country that it has been battling with in the United States for the last several decades. So that sales pitch is continuing. We're also to understand that starting on June 30th, the technical teams will be back to talking about the bigger issues here and trying to deal with Iran's nuclear program. All that to say, the memorandum was signed. We do know that there's been some friction, and in terms of where Americans are, the vast majority of the country is still against Donald Trump. There's only about 1 in 4 Americans who feels that this war was worth its cost. And on that, we know that the Pentagon is again asking Congress for another $80 billion to deal with a now depleted stockpile.
All right. Now, also this week, Reggie, 2 powerful earthquakes struck Venezuela, a country that has seen upheaval in its government, not too long ago when its president was captured by the U.S. military. So how is America responding to this natural disaster?
Right. So we saw Donald Trump with a statement out on social media yesterday suggesting that his country will be there as much as it can. We know that there are heavy urban search and rescue teams from even around Washington, D.C. and Virginia that have been dispatched to Venezuela. The Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, yesterday in Bahrain said that they are also giving an assist with overhead visual satellite imagery capabilities to give a better idea about scopes of damage in areas where the Venezuelan government may not be able to be getting any kind of visual or oversight because it may be too difficult to get there. So the U.S. is actively trying to lend a hand along with governments from around the world, including Mark Carney. We heard yesterday that millions of dollars will be made available in humanitarian assistance. This is something that is likely going to continue to worsen as the days come, as the U.S. Geological Survey fears that thousands may have been killed in this event.
All right, Reggie, let's talk about CUSMA now, because the free trade agreement is coming up for review in less than a week. How close are Canada and the U.S. to reaching a new framework for it?
Well, it appears not close at all. We heard from U.S. Ambassador Pete Huckstra this week on Canadian media suggesting that the two sides are not close at all, which is countering what he said last year before talks broke down when he said that both sides were incredibly close. And you're right, on July 1st, that is the technical expiry date here as to when this would go into a yearly review. Canada has asked for a 16-year extension. Donald Trump last week in Paris said that he'd like to see it expire, and at the same time he would like to see it terminated. Interestingly here, the Prime Minister and the President held a phone call on Wednesday where they went in depth about discussions towards NATO and the situation in the Middle East. But Prime Minister Carney says that the issue of CUSMA did not come up. And again, that is kind of a stark sentence to make, given the fact that we are into the final days here before the review was expected. The Prime Minister said, look, I could have made a bad deal this afternoon. I could have made a bad deal last year. We're not going to make a bad deal. The big question here is what kind of deal will be made. Minister LeBlanc meeting with the Alberta Business Council yesterday suggesting, again, CUSMA is in the best interest of all countries, but formal talks still haven't started.
All right, now Trump has made a number of changes, of course, during this second term, and now the Supreme Court just gave him the go-ahead to restart a policy that could affect more than 1 million foreigners, Reggie. So what can you tell us about that?
Right. So there were 2 different decisions from the U.S. Supreme Court on Thursday. Number one, it is going to allow for the removal of temporary protected status for hundreds of thousands of Haitians and Syrians that have been living in the United States for decades now, many of them with families. They're working, they're going to school. We've heard from administration officials yesterday saying if that temporary status isn't there, deportations can begin. Tom Home and the Borders are suggesting that if the countries where these people are from are in a better shape or better position, they can can go home. The question is, would Syria and Haiti be considered in a good place right now? So we're waiting to see what happens on that point. We're also waiting to see what happens in terms of asylum, with the U.S. Supreme Court essentially saying that people who have not physically stepped foot on American soil cannot apply for asylum. This was a question about whether or not somebody who was arriving near the border could apply. And the Supreme Court now says arriving near does not count. You can be turned away before the border, before you can step foot on soil. And again, the question is, how is this going to kind of roll into the fabric of American history, where the claim of asylum is something that was granted to anybody? The U.S. is now given a better opportunity here to turn people away.
All right, and Reggie, before we let you go here, why is Trump refusing to sign an overwhelmingly bipartisan housing bill?
Well, he was supposed to sign it and backed out 20 minutes before he was supposed to, and it's solely because he wants to see voting protections signed into law, the Save America Act, and without that, he says that he doesn't want anything else signed. The question is, will he be rebuked? If he doesn't sign this, it eventually will go into law anyways. If he tries to veto it, it has an overwhelming supermajority in Congress, so it's going to get signed regardless. But Donald Trump is still trying to push that American elections are not safe. He wants better federal oversight. It's receiving a lot of pushback. A lot of Republicans don't want to sign it. So until that happens, he says this isn't going to happen, although there are reports that the House may send this over to the White House anyways to get it signed.
All right, that is our Washington correspondent, Reggie Cecchini.